Hello, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's Jimmy here at Function Point. Welcome and thank you all for taking the time to talk a little bit about some of the advanced FP reporting capabilities here. So it is now 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. So if you guys don't mind, I'll maybe give everyone a little bit of, we'll just give everyone 1 minute here to potentially for any stragglers to join. But in the meantime, I am curious, what is your role at the agency? So while we wait for others, perhaps let's take a look. Looks like we have a lot of people from finance and operations today. Almost 2/3 of us. Well, we have also about a third in PM team and some in the accounts team. Awesome. I'm waiting for it to see if anyone says I do everything. Because we all know how agency life works. Cool. Awesome. All right, we'll give it another 10 seconds for the poll. Oh, there we go. Thank you, whoever supported me and saying you do everything. So thanks for that. All right, we'll close the poll now, but it sounds like we do half of us are in the finance and operations. We got about a third from the project management team and a few from the accounts team as well. So let me see if I can successfully share my screen this time without any hiccups. There we go. So hopefully you guys can all see my screen, but I'd like to, why don't we get the show started? So I'm gonna be your host today alongside with my partner in crime, Sophia Wilson. So if you've never met me, I am the Director of Sales and Marketing here at Function Point. And Sophia, I'm sure a lot of you have worked with her. She is the Manager of Customer Experience. Hello. Hey, Sophia, are you there with us?
Hey, Jimmy. Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. And did I share my screen
Yes, I
properly
can
this time?
see my face. You always know
Okay,
how that makes me feel.
awesome. Well, let's get started. So just a couple quick housekeeping. As once again, if you've attended this, there is in your GoToWebinar control panel at the bottom right, there is a questions tab. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to type them in at any given point, and Sophia will be able to help answer them as much as possible. Please note that we are also recording this webinar, so you will be able to share this or access this at any given point on YouTube and you will get an email with all the links. But let's jump into the agenda for today. So before we dive into a lot around the custom reporting and what type of reports you can potentially utilize, I do want to go through how the FP data is structured. I always find understanding the data structure of Function Point is going to be really key to understanding how to create those custom reports. And we'll talk a little bit about all the different ways you can customize them. And also a common question we always get when customizing report is, when do you use pivot grid versus bar graph versus line graph? So we'll do a little bit go through that, and of course going through live examples. And then we'll wrap it up with some of my top 5 tips to follow when creating custom reports. Okay, so FP data structure. So one of the key, this is really key because to understand, because in Function Point, there is so much data around your jobs, around your timesheets, invoices, expenses, tasks, efficiency, and how do you really consolidate these data together? So first off, I'd like everyone to think of your data from a job level. Okay. So when you think about, and a job level data might be when you ask questions of which of my jobs are profitable. How do I know which of my job or projects is going on budget? What's my estimate versus actuals for a specific client? So those are all typically on a job level. However, those job level reports or data is actually built and fed from all the data around your services and also then your transactional level. So your transactional level data includes things like when you create the invoice, when you enter an expense, or when your staff enters the timesheet. That feeds into the services, which will then give you the estimate versus actual, and then which feeds into the job. Okay? So that's one of the data structure from a job level. Then we also have a staff level type of structure. So in the staff level, very similar, your transactional level reports such as your task data, your timesheets, your invoices, is going to feed again into the services, which will give you an idea of what your efficiency, utilization, and billabilities are, and then which then feeds into the staff level. So notice one key thing is that I don't actually, in the staff level, I don't actually show estimate versus actuals. Okay, so every single time you're thinking about, I want to compare estimate versus actuals, it is usually, it is always on a job level that your report that you need to look at, okay, not a staff level. The only time where estimate and versus actual happens on a staff level is only for your tasks. And we'll talk a little bit into that. I'll go through a live example of that as well later on. But hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea of the FP data structure. Now, from ways to customize your reports. So in Function Point, there are 4 key ways to customize it. So of course, you can save your reports, share your reports. There's different ways to visualize the reports. You can also add new columns and calculated columns, and also filtering for your reports. So those are the 4 main ways. Now, so before I go into a live example, just want to talk about the visualization. So when you look at all the reports in Function Point, start with a table. Anytime you want to summarize something, so let's say I pulled an estimate versus actuals report, and now I want to answer the question, okay, which of my client is more profitable? So that means you are now summarizing on a client level. So therefore, a pivot grid is kind of what you want to look at. Whereas a bar graph, I like to say bar graph is when you want to compare things. So a good an example would be, I want to know which of my staff has more billable versus less billable hours. Okay, so that would be a comparison between 2 different staff, and a bar graph would come in very handy of that. Whereas line graphs, I like to say, general rule of thumb is line graphs is looking at trends over time. So this might answer, okay, I want to see what my staff utilization rate over the past 90 days. So that would be a trend over time. And typically line graph would be the best for that to visualize it. Other potential line graphs you might do is, okay, what's my revenue like over the last 90 days? Okay. So without further ado, let's go into some real life examples. Now, if you, I'm hoping for a quick poll. I want to just get a quick idea if people have, if everyone here has used FP's custom BI reporting in the past. I really should get that Jeopardy music out one day. Not sure if that show is even still on.
I think it is, but that would be so stressful right now, Jimmy.
Oh, all right. It looks, okay. It looks like we have a good 70% that actually have used the custom reporting tool. So really happy to see that. We do have about 27% that hasn't, and 3% saying, I think so. Okay. So if you have never used custom reporting module, and if I go too fast, don't worry. We did go through a little bit in the basic webinar last week, so feel free to also take a look at that. That might give you some background. But today, why don't we dive in? So you should be able to access the BI reporting on the top right. And once you go in, so the system does come with about 30 standard reports. So let me just put this down quick. Okay, so it does come with 30 cookie cutter reports, but what I want to do is let's build a custom report from scratch. So I'll go through a few examples, one doing with profitability and another one with staff efficiency. So like I mentioned, you want to think about whether you are starting on a job level, if you want to start on a job level, staff level, service level, or a transactional level report. So one of the most common, so if the question, I like to say the first thing is what is your goal? So perhaps your goal is to understand, I want to know why my jobs are not as profitable as I anticipated. I thought we were going to make 30% profit margin, but it only came in last quarter at 10%. Why is that? So now that question is going to help me think about, okay, what type of data would I need in order to understand that and analyze that question? So if I'm looking at profit, I definitely want to know what I've invoiced, what my cost is. Perhaps I need to know what my estimate is as well, because I predicted a 30% margin, but I only came in at 10%. So when I predict, that prediction probably came from the estimate. So I always like to start with the estimate data report. So some reports will say estimate actual invoice, whereas some will just say estimate data. I usually like to start with estimate data because of the fact that it's usually the raw data and then I just like to add and remove data points as I see fit. So in this case, sorry, I don't mean the estimate data report. I meant the job data report. I'm looking on a job level. Okay. So in this case, in my job data report, I see every single job. This is my raw data. I can see the estimate, actual, and invoiced. However, my original goal is to look at the profit. So I could have started with the profit analysis report as well, or in this case, I can also just add and fields for my calculation. So I'm now going to add a new column, and let's say I want to look at my cost. So now I add the actual total cost. So you can see my actual total cost is 6,224. You can drag and drop the columns as you see fit. So I can see my actual versus the cost, but my profit is really invoice minus the total cost. So if you do have the premium BI module installed, you can also add a calculator column instead. So I'm going to go ahead and add a calculator column. I'm going to give it a column name of, say, profit margin dollar value. This is a currency format. And in this case, I'm going to look at invoiced and then minus cost, actual total cost. So this is very similar to creating formulas in Excel. So overall, what you're looking for is you are adding, give it a column name, the format, and then what the formula is. And the formula would be derived from the fields within the report. And you can just add them in with the operators. So this formula, very simple, just taking the invoice minus the total cost. Confirm. And voila, my profit margin has now appeared, which is my invoiced subtracted by the actual cost right here. Okay. So that's probably the first way to customize the report by adding and removing columns. So not only can you add data points from other parts of the system, but you can also add your own calculator columns as you see fit. So before I continue, I'm just seeing a few questions that came in as well. So Sophia, were there any questions that I can help with?
Hey, Jimmy. Yeah, lots of great questions. Mostly actually in regards to the difference between the basic BI reporting and the premium features. So I think there's maybe just a bit of confusion there. Everyone's account comes with the basic BI features, which is our top, I believe it's 28 reports that we have in there pre-built for you. What would come at an extra cost is all of our premium items, which include, of course, saved reports, adding in specific calculated columns, being able to pivot your data, as well as create those bar and line graphs. So there is quite a value in some of those premium add-ons. I did have one question there that actually just came in from Victoria, Jimmy, and since you're on here already, it saved me having to type it. She was asking about that specific column you were just building and if you can do a percentage with that too, which I believe you can. And so maybe I'll just leave that one with you there, Jimmy.
Okay, great. So the answer is yes, you are able to create percentages as well. So in this case, perhaps I want to know my profit margin percentage. So the formula would be invoice minus cost divided by invoice. Yes, okay, I think my math is, I passed grade 5 math there. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create a new column again. So I'm going to call this profit margin percentage. So the key here is you want to change the column format into percentage. So in this case, I would have invoiced. Oh, this is cool. I did not know we could do that. So we'll do invoice minus the cost, total cost, and then we'll have to put a bracket beside that whole thing and then divide it by the total invoiced. All right. So now we'll let it calculate that a little bit. Okay, so now you can see the profit margin percentage showing on the right-hand side. Now, if you ever make a mistake on the calculation, you can just click on this FX. So the FX shows that this column is a calculated column that you've created. So just click into it and you'll be able to, the formula calculation part will appear again, and you can just add that in. So that is the profit margin. Now, going back to the original, so let's take it one step at a time, actually. So now so I've added the profit margin I wanted to see, but overall, I'm trying to find out, okay, where the leakage is for my profit margin, what is making more money. And right now, my report is showing on a line by line job level status, but perhaps I want to see overall for Great Atlantic Insurance instead. So what I can do is turn this, so that means I'm trying to summarize it. So I'm going to create a pivot grid. Take a look at and basically you want to think about what you want to summarize it by. So we want to summarize it by company name, client in this case, and I want to see the profit margin that we have. So let's keep it very simple here. So now in this case, I can see all my data is now summarized by by my client. So you can see Great Atlantic Insurance right here has made us a profit of 47,000. Okay. If you want to, a lot of people now will ask, okay, so which jobs was I more profitable over others, in this case with Great Atlantic Insurance? So in the pivot grid, you can also summarize it, not just by company, you can also expand that to the specific job as well. You can add other data sets too. So perhaps I'm curious about what my actual subtotal, actual total cost is in this case. So you can add various data sets. So now inside, you can see my profit margin versus the cost. And for Great Atlantic Insurance, we made a profit of 47,000. And if I expand this, I can see that 47,000 consists of, quite a bit of jobs here. So job 30179, 180, and the breakdown of the margin for each specific one. So that's kind of how you would be able to customize, you would use the pivot grid. And the grand total will show up on here at the very bottom. And if you ever expand any of these line items, so let's say I expanded Furry Creek Golf Academy, we do have 5 jobs, so it will subtotal Furry Creek for you as well. Some people like to ask, a little trick. If you want to expand all of these at once, you just need to right click and expand all. It's not a or right click to collapse all. So that was something that I didn't know until about 2 months in, and I was like, what? You dev product team, you never told me. So I thought that was kind of cool. Last but not least, so that's how a pivot grid can help you summarize the data. So again, back to the question of, okay, how do I know where my profit margin leakages are? So in this case, I personally, as a project manager, I love to look at reports and summarize them on a few different ways. Most people, a lot of agencies, they always start with, job profitability and client profitability, which makes a lot of sense. But what about if I want to, a couple of times, one of the hunch I always have is from an AE perspective, because I know some salespeople discount a little bit more than others. So do they do a specific AE earn us less profit margin as a result? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put AE. I want to summarize my data by the account rep now. And a really cool part about this is I can just drag and drop under the row here from AE, put AE at the very top. Now my data, instead of summarized by the company, is now summarized by the staff or by my AEs. So I can see which specific staff, which of my salespeople's projects make more money for us, profit at the end of the day. Okay, so that's how we can add. So this is a quick kind of idea about profit margin. You can also put this in a bar graph for comparison. So for example, a question is, I know I'm profitable, but which of my job type, for example, makes the most money for me? So that's where you're now comparing. So by comparing, I love bar graph for doing this, because think about, okay, if I want to know which job type actually makes the most money, let's go ahead and add job type to the x-axis. And then in the y-axis, I want to look at my profit margin. Ooh, I have a lot of job types in my system. But overall, you'll be able to see here now, I have a bar graph that actually looks at all the different job types in your system. So in this case, I have quite a bit. And for each job type, which do I generate the most profit on? So obviously in this case, website is generating a lot of money for us. And all my in-house jobs don't generate revenue, which makes sense. But that's when you can use the filter to get rid of that, to maybe show that, I only want to see jobs that have been invoiced already. So by doing that, you'll be able to see I only actually invoice maybe 6 of these active job types in my system. So as you can see, again, bar graph is great for comparison. Okay. Now for bar graphs, there is another color by. So you can have either multiple bar graph in function point or a stacked bar graph. Okay. So a stacked bar graph is when I want to take a look, okay, maybe I want to look at all my job types and what type, or maybe I want to compare, okay, how much profit, instead of by the job type, how much profit each of my AE makes for me, who makes the most. And there you go, I can see Beth makes the most. And I might go, okay, Beth, wow, she's doing really well. So what does she sell? So perhaps I can add job type in here. And now you can see Beth, most of her revenue or profit comes from job types of a website, whereas Bobby does not. He actually doesn't sell any website jobs. So that might be something we talk to him about. So that's one way, but in this case, you can also do it under the graph type. That's a stacked bar instead. So now you can see, okay, Beth sells the most, but we can see the orange being a lot on the website, but there's no orange for Miro or Bobby our second best salesperson. So perhaps we need to share both of their knowledge together. Okay, so that is how you would be able to use bar graph versus pivot grid. So one of the very cool reports that I've seen that a lot of agencies use. So back to the original question, okay, projected versus my actual margin. So I have that already built in my system. So I'm just going to pull it up here. So in this case, I have a projected versus actual profit margin. It was I started with the same job data report, which had the estimate, actual, invoice, and then I added the cost and calculated columns for my profit margins as well. Okay. So here's where the interesting thing is in function point is when you create the estimate, I'm hoping most of you would know is that when you create the estimate, you can project your margin potentially, okay, based on your average cost rate and the bill out rate of that estimate, which I have added as a new column, which is the estimated total cost here versus my estimated total. And that can be added when you create the new column under estimated service here, right here. Okay. So what that does for me now is when I summarize it in the pivot grid, I can see all my clients, what my projected profit margin is, okay, what I anticipate to make versus the actual profit margin I made afterwards. So in this case, I am not estimating very well because I'm always underbilling I'm either underbilling or something is happening that causes a drop in my profit margin. And it's across the board. So when I look at a data like this, it tells me, okay, this is consistent. I am not making the projected profit for all my clients. So it is likely not because clients are being over demanding. So I might look at other type of trends. So maybe what about the services that I'm providing? So in this case, if I look at it by the service, I am still being in the negative, trending the wrong way for a lot of these as well. Okay. So this is when you want to start looking at data sets based on your services, or maybe it's your job type or other different ways and hopefully if you're in the business, you would have a much better sense of, I like to say your gut feel of where the problem is most likely true. And you want to have data to support it. So if my gut feel says it's probably people overselling. I know, Ross St. George, the salesperson, discounts, 20, 30% all the time. So let's go ahead and take a look and summarize by the account reps instead. So in this case, you can see Ian has a much lower profit margin projected, whereas Jenny, Miro are pretty on track. They're pretty good at setting the right expectations. So this would be one way to do it. Okay, so that is one report.
Hey, Jimmy, do you mind if I
Yes.
just cut in real quick? Sorry, I was just so frantically answering some questions that I missed what one of the formulas were for one of these columns. And I have Marin asking, where does that projected margin figure come from again? Just because I don't want to give the incorrect formula, do you mind just running us through that real quick again?
Sure. So the
Thank you.
projected profit margin is on a job level report. And in the job level report, you'll be able to see under the estimate, there's an estimate total. So under the estimate, you can see the estimated total. And this is pulling the total estimated value from your estimate module, and then the estimated total cost. Okay. So that's how it would look like. So once again, pivot grid so you can always, and one important part actually I forgot to mention on the pivot grid is you can summarize the data differently. whether it's a count, a sum, or an average. Okay. So if you're looking at percentages, obviously you would typically want to do averages instead. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jimmy. And then I did also just have one more question from Kayla as well around making sure that we're filtering by the correct date ranges. Do you mind just quickly showing that adjust data pop up at the top so that we can show where the dates are most easily pulled, if you don't mind? I think
Sure.
just visually be great.
That's a great question, actually. So the adjust data, so depending on the report you pull, there's, and this might be a better way if I just go back to the report selection screen. So in the report selection screen, depending on the report you choose and the type of report, whether it's a transactional, job level, staff level report, let's say if I'm looking for estimate actual versus invoice, there's some initial filters you can use, but the date filters, you might see multiple date filters. So one is the estimate open date versus data date range. So if you see a report that allows you to filter by data date range, which happens mostly on job level and staff level reports, this is very similar to the job financial, the financials tab when you have a job or a client open inside the system. It's saying that you only want to look at data during this filtered range where there are transactions happening in that range. So that means like your invoices, timesheets, expenses, for example. So if I selected a data date range of say current month and did not create any filters, what this is going to do is pull all my jobs that had activities around timesheets for the hours, the estimate, actuals, and invoice during the current month only. But whereas if I pick say past 365 days, then all these total estimated value and invoice value will be updated to all transactional dates over the past 365 days. So that becomes really, really important. Now, however, note that please don't get confused with the data date. That's the data date range. But if you see other date filters like estimate open date or invoice date or timesheet date, etc., then that is when that's a date for you based on, say, if you're trying to answer the question, okay, I want to see profitability of all jobs that I started in the month of March. Okay, not activities that occurred in the month of March. So if you follow accrual accounting, the data date range will probably apply to you much more. But whereas if you have a lot of quick small jobs that usually that you don't really need to follow accrual accounting since they complete within a couple of weeks, then something like estimate open range or job open date or job close date might make more sense for you. Okay. Whew, okay, hopefully that didn't go over too many people's head. I know that took a while for me to understand as well, but hopefully that was a really long way to answer the question, but I think it's very important. So I hope that helps. Okay, so we got about 12 minutes left. So I do want to show a staff level report because one of the common questions a lot of people ask right now is, I want to evaluate my staff utilization, efficiency, but at the same time, I don't want them to be overworked. Okay. So when we talk about staff efficiency, traditionally, always from a financial perspective, we're always looking at how much billable hour percentage they achieved. However, what happened? I'm hearing more and more. A lot of people are saying, well, just because I worked, I had 60% billable instead of 70. It's because I was trying to fix, Sophia's mistake, for example. Sorry, Sophia, for throwing you under the bus there. So how is that fair? So one other way that you can evaluate efficiency outside of billable hour percentage is through the task data report inside function point. Okay, so if you do use function point to assign tasks with budgeted hours and actual hours, this is going to be very powerful for you. So in the task data report, it's going to show every single task that you've assigned to that individual and what the date and such, but the key here is it shows what the budgeted hours versus actual hours. So the budgeted estimated hours is, your project management team telling the person, hey, I expect you to complete this task or this copy design within 10 hours, 20 hours, whatever it is. And then the total actual hours is how much time they've tracked to actually complete that. So this is the only way to see estimate versus actuals for a staff, is on a task level. So in this case, what I can now do is I can say, take a look at all my staff. So I'm gonna look at assigned, the estimated hours versus actual hours, and the variance. So now I can see, okay, these are all my individuals, how many hours of work I've assigned during that time frame. And I might adjust this data so that it is maybe over the past 30 days. So you can see, okay, over the past 30 days, how many hours of workload I've assigned each individual and how long it took them to complete each one and what the variance is. So my whole team is actually pretty good. Maybe I am way overestimating how long it takes for them to complete something in this case. So this is, in my opinion, can be a really fair way to evaluate how efficient a team member is. Now, here's where it gets interesting, is on the task, as you all know, if you assign tasks, you can actually associate the task to a specific service. So in this case, I might go, okay, Beth is pretty efficient overall. There's about only less than 10% variance between her estimate versus actual task hours. But I can expand this and see, okay, what type of task, which is the service associated to those tasks, she's working on. And I can see that she's actually really efficient when it comes to, say, client management type of work. However, when it comes to maintenance, she's not very good at. Okay, that might be because she's not a developer, so we need to stop giving her development work or cover for others. So yeah, so this is one of the great ways you can use to evaluate a task efficiency. Now I'm gonna try and show you a couple other examples of a task report that I've made. Staff efficiency by task. So in this staff efficiency by task, because we know the service associated to the task, we can even see the hours that we budgeted for the team, actual hours they've used. But furthermore, I can also calculate the billable value of those task hours that they've tracked. And this is a lot of data. So once again, let's maybe just look at the last 30 days. So I can see in the last 30 days, my accounts team tracked 893 hours, efficiency, 25% than expected, and then what my billable value is, estimated versus actual billable. So there's a lot of different ways in Function Point's custom reporting module for you to really dissect and analyze your data. So I had this report based on, I might want to summarize quickly between any of these. So you can quickly drag and drop between these. Okay, so that's and I'll show you one last report that I always use is this budget burn rate report. Because budget burn rate report, I want to show you, we've talked about pivot grids a lot, and it's just because I came from as a project manager, I used a lot of pivot grids, but I do want to show you a few more bar graph type of examples to compare. So comparing profitability between salespeople, efficiencies between staff, or the type of work you do. So in this case, I actually have a budget burn rate report. So from the raw data perspective in my budget burn rate, I actually know the estimated hours on the job versus actual hours. And then I took the remaining and calculated the percentage budget used, which is the total hours divided by the estimated hours. Okay. So by doing that, I can now create a comparative bar graph. So in this case, I am comparing all the different job types I have, and I can see exactly which type of jobs go over the 100% budget and which ones do not. So I'm pretty good, meeting on budget for everything except branding type of jobs. And I'm actually do really well on the website. In fact, this probably shows that I am overcharging website, or I can be more competitive, even more competitive from a pricing perspective for websites. So this is the type of data that really will help you understand, where the gap is. And instead of looking at it by the job type, perhaps your suspicion is that I know some clients are more high maintenance. So let's go ahead and take a look at this by client instead. So in this case, if I look at it by client, I can see Blue Line Digital and Furry Creek and Great Atlantic Insurance are all almost like 18, 7, 107, 109% over budget, whereas everyone else is pretty as expectation, or Home Depot is actually well below, is very low maintenance in this case. So that's how I like to use bar graph. So we got about 4 minutes on the left here. Before we dive into kind of the 5 tips I have, Sophia, any questions from the team?
Hey, Jimmy. I think I've covered most of them. The only thing I'll just sort of throw in here for everyone is a lot of questions are coming through that are very specific to your workflow and your systems, which of course are a little bit more tricky for me to answer here in the back end. So if you do have anything like this, I think a few of you have organized some follow-ups with, but if you do ever have any questions that are more specific to your workflow and we haven't already organized some follow-ups, either A, let me know on here, or B, feel free to reach out to the entire success team at success@functionpoint.com, and we'll make sure that we answer all of your questions. So that's just one little extra thing to throw in there.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, so I want to share. We will share the slide deck to you at the end. But I did have a few tips around custom reporting that I personally follow. So the first thing, whenever you start looking at a report, I always find the most important thing to ask yourself is, what is the goal or answer you are trying to achieve? I get a lot of people saying, hey, I want to look at a report that, I want to look at what all my invoices are. And then I'm like, great, not a problem. We can definitely do that. But what is the goal? Are you trying to find out, did you miss a billing? Or are you trying to just do a reconciliation? So that is really the key that you want to always think about, because you don't want to build a report and then at the end you realize, oh, actually, this doesn't really tell me what I want to do. So the second part is, once you know the goal or answer you're trying to get, think about what data points do you need to accomplish that. And the second one is, do you need to drill down? Okay, so drilling down means we talked about job level, staff level, or service level, or transactional level report. So your initial goal might be, I want to know which jobs are more profitable than others. A lot of people then will afterwards, right, once they know that, will ask, okay, which of the services within that is more profitable? So that means by asking that follow-up question, you now are thinking or wanting to drill down from a job level to a service level report. Or you might be asking, okay, I know which jobs are profitable. I want to now know, all the expenses, which vendor I spent the most on that contributed to those costs. So that is a drilling down to the transactional level report. Why you want to ask this question is because this will help you determine if you are looking for just one report, you need to create one overall report and then maybe a secondary transactional report afterwards. The third tip is when you're in doubt. So when you're in doubt on which base report to start with, always start with the highest tier report first. I personally find that once you start with the highest tier, there's not as much data in there or fields you can pull in. So therefore, it gives you a little bit more clarity. It doesn't confuse you as much until you get familiar with all the data in the system. Okay, so the fourth one. So this is a very common misconception because when you are wanting to compare estimate with actuals or invoiced, that will never be on a transactional level report. So keep that in mind. If you're looking for estimate versus actual for any dollar values, you always have to go to a job or service level report. Because on a transactional report, if you think about when you invoice a client, your invoice does not contain the data for estimated value. When you enter an expense to pay a vendor, that expense does not have the estimated value on itself, on that data. It lives on the job estimate instead. So that's why you need a job level report. Okay. And last tip is if you're ever stuck, just reach out to us. Like Sophia said, I really love building reports. I know there's a few other people in our team that are report gurus and report freaks, really. So feel free to reach out to us and ask. Don't hesitate. So that's all I got. Last but not least, like I mentioned, we'll share the webinar, recording, we'll also share the slide deck. But I will also make sure that we also share with you an encyclopedia of all the function point reports, which is going to include all the fields you can pull into that report, as well as kind of an overview of a description of what that report will show or give you. But right now it is 10:47. I do have 13 minutes, so if any of you have a specific report that you would like to challenge me with on the spot, on the fly to build for you, or show how it can be built, feel free to type them in the questions. But otherwise, thank you all for your time. I hope it wasn't too technical, but I'm always happy to talk reports with anyone. So feel free to reach out to success@functionpoint.com. But yeah, Sophia, did I miss anything?
I don't believe so, but I think you're gonna regret playing with this one because Diana just sent us a real brain teaser. Are you interested in building this one out, seeing if we can pull it off?
Sure. Let's see if I can pull this off on the fly.
Okay, so she's asking, how can you pull in one report of invoices for a period, like a specific month, but all expenses are pulled to create the net profit? So Diana, if I'm understanding this correctly, you want to pull for just a single invoice, but all expenses that have been applied to the job in total. Is that correct? Yes.
Sorry, I missed
yes,
that
it
last
is.
comment from you, Sophia.
Yes.
Okay.
So ultimately what she wants is she wants only one invoice that could be on a job, but she wants all expenses that are applied to that job. I don't think we can do this in a single report, if I'm being honest,
So you
Jimmy.
want to see all the expense line items on one invoice. Okay. Ooh, that's definitely, so to me that right away is a transactional report that you're looking for. So now, because you're looking at both expenses and invoices, I'm thinking about, do we start with an expense report, which will have the invoice value, or do we start with the invoice report? However, I don't believe the invoice report can pull each
The
individual
individual expenses.
right?
No, it would.
So, but you might be able to say, but you want the for one report invoices for a period. So you want to see all the invoices within the month of March and all the expenses items associated to that.
Yeah, so Diana has gotten more specific here. She says all November invoices and all related expenses to those jobs, but the expenses were over 3 months.
Yeah.
I'm honestly thinking right now, Jimmy, if it's going to be 2 separate date ranges for the different data points, that this would probably need to be 2 separate reports. But I'll be curious to see if you can think of something further.
Because there are 2 different transactional reports you're trying to pull in together. Yeah, so that's 2 different separate transactional reports. I love this. This is kind of cool. This is kind of fun. It gets my brain going.
I'm glad you nerd out on this stuff.
I know,
it brings
right?
me joy.
It's really weird. I don't know. I feel like I might do it. I feel like I might be able to, although I need to get the invoice number in here. Where's the invoice number? Probably need that. Okay, so, and you want the invoiced amount, is my guess. Invoice expenses, invoiced amount. Okay, so you're looking at the invoice date, and you want the invoice amount. You want the expense item. Expense. Oh, I need the expense ID. So, but we want the invoice date to be in the past 30 days, let's say. So all invoices in the past 30 days, and you want the expense associated to it. Okay, it's the PO number. PO number. Row. Actually, you want the invoice number first. So I don't know, I feel like I'm getting close. Okay, you want the invoice number, the expenses associated to it, and then you probably want the expense type. Expense name associated to that. Okay. Okay, I think I'm getting close, Diana. So we have month of March, the invoices created during that time frame. So invoice 123 has the PO expense number of 48 and 1 line item of photography. Don't have multi-line item expenses here, but I think this is what you're looking for. I think that's what you're looking for, Diana. I will have to double check the data sets on here. So one of the things I like to do is just to make sure I pulled everything correctly, but I'm gonna save this actually, just so I have it. Okay. Just so I can, but yeah, I think if you started with the expense data report, because the expense data report, even though it's a transactional level report, we do track, that whether that expense has been invoiced or not. So therefore, what I just did is I just pulled in from the invoice, what was billed, so including the invoice date and the invoice number, and then from there you can summarize it through the pivot grid by grouping it based on the invoice first, then break it down to the exact expenses in that invoice. And so because I only included, so because I filtered based on the date the invoice was created, okay, so this will include, this should, I am not filtering by the expense date. So this is telling me that the report should be pulling in all the expenses regardless of when they're created, but only during the invoice time frame here. Okay, so hopefully that helps. So let's see if we have another one. Got about 5 minutes left here. Do we have another potential report request? I think we have time to do one more. That was a tough one, by the way, Diana. So thanks for that. But I think, yeah.
It looks like Diana does have more details. However, I think now that we're getting really nitpicky, it might actually be better for maybe Jimmy, you and I to connect with her CSM to continue building that further. There was a question just in regards to revenue schedules. I know that we have not built our legacy revenue schedule into the BI as of right now, but Jimmy, do you have any workarounds or solutions for that you can think of?
So great question about revenue schedule report. And the main reason that the revenue schedule report has not been pulled into BI, the new BI reporting tool, is because the revenue, if you take a look from a, and I'm gonna really nerd out here, folks, I'm really gonna nerd out. And this is my stats 101 from university come into play. So it really is hard because if you look at the revenue schedule report, the Excel sheet, it actually is 3 different reports into one Excel sheet. Okay, because you're gonna see there's actually 3 separate tables, and I might have a sample here that I can pull up for you. Whereas in BIR, you're looking at a report one by one. And I'm assuming this is the gross revenue forecast report that we're talking about, the exact name. So in this gross revenue forecast report, you can actually see we have a summary over here. So this table is one report by itself. And furthermore, the data sets that it has are all in different date ranges because it's by year and month. And it's just from a logistic perspective doesn't work on how our BI reporting is built. And then here we have a second report and then a third report. So that's why the revenue forecast report is still accessible via the Excel, but not in BIR because it's just physically impossible in the BIR right now to display 3 separate pivot grids in one report with all the different data points. So hope that explains it a little bit. However, it's still there. It's in the Excel report. I know a lot of you love it. So it's a really powerful report. So yeah, hope that helps.
And it has been requested quite a bit. I do hope that we'll be able to go ahead and build that in our BI in the future as well.
Okay,
all right, 2 minutes.
So I think there's one more. I see a question from Bridget. Is there a report that we can see if POs are billed? Yes. So that's actually a much easier report. So once again, I like to start with the expense data report. Again, just because it contains all the data that you usually need. That's just kind of how I've been trained. I like working on a report with minimal data and add my own in. So in the expense data report, it shows you the billable value. But in this case, if I'm thinking about what data is needed, I want to see what was invoiced. If whether they are billed or not, that means they should have an invoice value to it. So in this case, there's a few ways you can do it. You can look at whether they have the expense has an invoice number to it or an invoice amount. It's really up to you. So I'm going to use invoice amount or invoice number. So in this case, you're going to see some of these POs with the billable has an invoice amount or invoice number associated to it. So if you're really just looking for POs that are not billed, because that you want to make sure they're all billed. You just take a look at invoice amount less than 0. So that's one way to do it. Wait. Oh, because it's blank. That's. I would love it if all of you go in and submit a request to add more filter capabilities here. So like if it's a field is blank. But my workaround to that, actually, now that I remember, is I put in a pivot grid and then billable. Is because in the pivot grid, it will actually, let's add the PO number. So in the pivot grid, it actually, if it's blank, it will put it in a group that is blank. So I can see these are all my POs that are blank. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is in the table, you can just sort by this. So you can see all the top ones does not have an invoice amount and are not billable, but have a billable value to it. Cool. And once again, you can export this to an Excel if you really want to. All right. Hope that answered your question there, Bridget. So I think we are officially out of time. It is 11:01. But once again, my tip number 5, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at success@functionpoint.com. And we'll be happy to help you out. Hope you all enjoyed this.
Awesome. Thank you, Jimmy.
Thanks, Sophia.